Because if you're all here, he's gonna do like this,
Now you have all.
and then he's gonna fall out of
I will
his,
be walking like.
he's gonna fall out of his, so now Lisa's
So right now,
here.
Oh, hey Josh, how are you?
What are you ask?
How tall are you?
6'8".
Wow. Double
Two.
Dr. Ryan, you're not on YouTube, you're on Zoom.
I want to.
No one told you to give feedback. I know, I was gonna.
Oh, yeah, I guess,
Just make sure you can hear us, right? So just wave to me.
I guess we could probably just leave it here.
Okay, you can hear us.
You guys hear me okay?
Should we zoom just a little so this is the primary one that people.
Oh, you're so tall.
Can they hear me okay?
Yeah. One more.
If anyone's on any device, don't be on the live stream from YouTube or Google, because then you'll get feedback, okay? We have Zoom going, we have YouTube live going, but you're actually here, so it should be okay. But if we have like people on the same platform, then we'll get feedback, reverberation, and badness, so. Sound good?
Before you start, this is just so you see, it's between your two screens. If you want to stay with
camera?
Yes. And so you see these two screens behind you, that is your like, if you walk back and forth, we can see you the whole time, as long as you don't.
No, I need a break tag.
I need a break, I see it 24/9.
Now, if someone types something else.
Yes.
Hi. We have everybody kind of sitting over here in the center since we're gonna be live on YouTube.
Okay,
Get
I can't
excited.
see any of you.
No,
That's.
no, but still get excited.
Is the audio now on?
Yes, we are audio. You might check it. Right here on screen.
Right. Yeah.
Ginger.
Right, ginger.
So your first rest.
Yeah. Do I have the money?
Am I still looking? Do actually.
Yes.
So I just, that's.
It's fun.
My mom said.
Yesterday, because our sister was out, she's like, once you graduate, we're buying a house. It's like, we're buying your own house.
Okay, so tracks don't. Yes.
You're good. She's like, I'm like, oh, I need. They're gonna be like, no.
Yeah.
Close my mouth.
Alright,
guys, so just pull up our car when you go there and I just put it down. Our portable.
So there we go.
Okay.
Okay, maybe it just needs a little bit heavier.
No, I need to sit down. Don't take it.
I'm like.
Feet, it's.
Yeah, we got a
So head back.
That's why we think.
So you sit down.
We're gonna start with the general.
That's rough.
He's tall.
She really good, don't get her started.
I'll be listening to it on my way home.
Like your answer.
Kelly, how are you doing?
Good, so we have, the slide, I mean, you're out there, it's pulled up, so as you're talking, I'm sharing their screen. And then, if you go to the PowerPoint, then I'll share PowerPoint. Yeah, Carlos is one of our urgent care providers. Hunter's here.
Hunter, you know.
Yeah, we have some, medical students, residents.
Okay.
Just said no.
But I took it.
Emily, how are we doing on attendance?
They're all missing one, but hear from Kayla. Like, is she okay? Coming.
Yeah, the one I
Let's give it like another minute for figuring out where.
What, parking, we're parking, we're parking situation.
Gonna say like, we'll walk again.
Parking, hey, parking.
Okay.
So I saw you boobs. I just. Sorry. And please make sure your cell phones are silenced before, since we are live.
All valid, good.
All good? Remember, just make sure you speak up. Very good.
Okay.
That's what I just said.
Yeah. There we go. Congratulations. Should we want to just begin and?
I say go
Okay.
right for it, but yeah.
So I'm Dr. Matt Sedgley. How are you guys doing tonight?
Good, how are you?
Everyone like that. Someone's had their caffeine, I like it. So I am a sports medicine physician with MedStar Health. And my specialty that I'm trained in is family medicine, and I have a fellowship in sports medicine. So I'm here tonight to talk to you about marathon medicine or racing medicine in general. I'm the director of running medicine, which means if there's a race that MedStar touches, I'm involved somehow. So that's good and bad. I think that, puts me on the hook for things. But what's really cool is I get to work with all sorts of folks. I'm very comfortable working with other doctors. I hope that'd be true. I'm also very familiar working with physical therapists. We work with RNs and other levels of nursing. We have EMTs that work with us. And also, my favorite, I work with you, athletic training students and athletic trainers. And you guys can make some of the biggest differences. Because in marathon medicine, think about all the stuff I know. The urea acid cycle, the Krebs cycle. Not so important in the finish line tent. However, you're going to see a lot of musculoskeletal injuries. You're going to see people with strains, sprains, abrasions. They might just be overwhelmed. Maybe they ran a really good race. Maybe they ran a race for cancer. To have a memory of their grandmother. Something of really good meaning to them. And they might say, oh my God, I just feel weird. And you have to sometimes tease that out. Are you feeling strange because you just had a very emotional race? Or are you having chest pain? Or did you go down because you kind of stopped moving and all the blood went to your feet? Or are you having a heart attack? So what I'm going to do tonight is kind of run through some very common things we see in marathon medicine. And I want to make sure that you guys have the opportunity to ask questions. I'm going to do the boring stuff, the algorithms. I'm helped by, super proud of Dr. Kelly Ryan. She's like one of the best fellows we've ever had. She's amazing. She's actually our co-sports medicine medical director for the Baltimore Marathon. So that, hand the keys to the kingdom to her here soon. And she's been working in this race, how many years now? Over 10. In fact, if you go back 10 years, she really ran that mile 20 Lake Montebello site and teaches at our Franklin Square residency. She's also a family medicine doctor, also fellowship trained in sports medicine, helps us out at the racetracks. She's a concussion specialist. I mean, if I tell you all the things she does, we'll be here all night. So we have an impressive group to help you, and we're also joined by Carissa Colangelo. Carissa, raise your hand. She makes me look smart on race day. She's gonna help herd you guys and teach and make a learning experience for you. So I'm gonna go into some of these algorithms, but let's not lose, kind of our focus on these are individuals that you're gonna run into race day, and you can make a huge difference. After I go through the boring part, we'll take just a short break and we'll kind of bring it all together with some case studies. And then at the end, we're gonna have a little bit of a review on how to actually document in our electronic medical record, which is RaceSafe. Jay Yank is here. He's actually a professor at UMBC. Jay, how many years have we been doing this?
Probably 7?
7 years. And we've worked with other races, ultramarathon distance together. He's gonna teach you how to use the app. And remember, it's garbage in, garbage out. Literally, when we first started using these apps, someone wrote in, probably voice to text, green broccoli. And that was the diagnosis of that runner. Now, who knows what they really said? Because of course, voice to text always messes up what I say. But you're gonna be important because when we look back, what if we suddenly see 50 people at mile 16? We're gonna ask ourselves, what happened there? Was it a hot day? Was it a humid day? Or like a traffic accident? And we're gonna comb through the data you might put into the EMR. And if we're looking at green vegetables as the answer, we don't know what's going on. But if we get a nice, concise sprain, ankle, left, we might say, God, okay, the cobblestone streets there are not a great place to run this race. Maybe we need to move around that and not have 15 people break their ankle. So we'll have 3 portions of tonight, and we thank everyone who's joining us with the Zoom. Thank you for the MedStar Health people. Hello. It will be recorded, and then we also have the live stream for Google on YouTube, new for us. And so we have multiple ways you can either rewatch this, and of course on race day, we'll be around. We want you to learn. A lot of our athletic trainers go into leadership in MedStar Health, okay? So it's not that you can't, do bread and butter ATC work, but Carissa is super important for all of our races, for a lot of our community outreach. So hopefully you see this opportunity tonight, not just to learn about hearts and heat and, all the other fun stuff we're gonna run into, but hopefully get a little taste of what you can do as an athletic trainer. That may mean you go on to become an ATC PT. That may mean you go on, my boss, Sean Huffman, Vice President of Sports Medicine, is a PT ATC. I report to an athletic trainer. He's in charge of all of our contracts for Orioles, Ravens, Wizards. We don't have the Commanders, sorry. But we have the Capitals. We have all these professional teams. We have 15 colleges, 12 universities, hundreds of high schools. What a great job, don't you want that? You can be telling me what to do. So with that, I'll kind of take a break here and say, are there any questions before I start into some exciting stuff? All right, here goes. Can everyone hear me okay? Camden, we good? All right. Back rows, paying attention, I like it. So, these algorithms were built by some pretty smart people. And me too. I don't know how I got in there. But the head of the Corey Stringer Institute, that's Doug Casa, Dr. Doug Casa, Dr. John Jardine, okay, emergency medicine doctor, athletic trainer, head of the Boston Marathon, Chris Trounos, head of the Marine Corps Marathon, Shelley. All these smart people. They sat down, head of the Army 10 miler. We had actually 5 former people from the Army 10 miler. We had Fran O'Connor, who if you guys Google heat stroke, he's well published on this. All come together and say, you know what, we should make it easy to take care of emergencies. And if you know what it's like on the sidelines, you kind of sometimes sit around and there's a lot of time. You get to check your phone, text your mom, see how your friends are doing, and then bam, something's happening and you're really busy. And you'll see that in marathon medicine that a certain phase you'll have the winner come in, everyone claps. Around the 4-hour mark, everybody comes in. Military loves to train at races because you got 1,000 people to triage real quick. That can be tough. Great skill to learn though. Sick, not sick. So we had all these experts come together and we said there should be a master algorithm that if you're having a bad day or you're busy, you can quickly look this up and determine what to do. Now, you're gonna know that because I'm gonna lecture to you tonight. You're gonna know it all, you're gonna be amazing. But you know, sometimes things are kind of crazy, or a case will be difficult, and you can go right back to this. So this is our master algorithm. And we integrated essentially American Heart Association data, EMT data, because we start way up at the top with AVPU. Jay, what is AVPU?
Mental status.
Mental status. Someone comes into your tent at the course, someone comes into the finish line, and the first thing I want to know is, are they alert? Are they verbal? Are they in pain? Are they unresponsive? When I come in, I'm like, I hurt. What do you know right away? I'm alert. I'm conscious. I'm breathing. Now, if I start talking about little green men and my alertness is kind of odd, you're like, whoa, Dr. Essentially is an odd duck. Maybe I'm alert, but maybe I'm confused. But I'm going to start there because if I'm unresponsive, laying there, that's not good. Now I'm kind of pushing in my brain towards sick, not sick. I'm thinking, ooh, sick. And then I'm going to think about the things that will kill me right away. Okay, who wants me to have a pulse here right now? I do. Thank you, sir. I saw that. Who wants to be breathing? I hope all of you guys. So if you have someone who's breathing and has a pulse, my blood pressure just went down a lot. Despite the amount of coffee that Emily Hildebrandt just brought me, my blood pressure goes way down. Because now I know they're breathing and they have a pulse. I can actually take my pulse and be like, whew, they look strange, but they're not dying. But the very first thing we want to do is shunt them off if they are not breathing or don't have a pulse. And we have an algorithm for that because we work for the military folks. There's an algorithm for that. So you can see right here, if you're unresponsive and you're not breathing, you go to the ECC, that's the Emergency Cardiac Care Algorithm. We also have like our abbreviations in the military. So, however, you can see that's important. So we're like right away, someone comes in, they're crumped over, pulse, breathing. Now I'll tell you right now, when we go into the cardiac one, a lot of runners who have cardiac problems, they don't reflex. They're running, cardiac event occurs, they go down, scraped face, bloody nose, no protective reflexes, they just go down. The people who are kind of like, all right, they start to lower themselves down, they're thinking about the fact they're going down. The guys who are in VTAC, VFib, going down. So that's off immediately to the side. Now, in a perfect world, you have a pulse and you're breathing. Okay, so what's the next most important thing I want? I want to know if all that breathing and that pulse is important and it's working. Altered mental status. Okay, if I'm making sense, I'm like, hello, Kelly Ryan. I just ran the slowest race known to man, but God, I hurt. Well, that makes sense. That's reality, right? This is like some sort of 2.5 hour half marathoner in front of you. However, let's say you kind of are talking to me and you're like, this guy doesn't make any sense. He's confused. He's obtunded. All these fancy words for, yeah, right. There are things we know will do this. Now remember, we're selecting down. If you go into the ER, they're going to do a lot of different workup. Love my ER doctor friends. Dr. Hudson was also one of the authors here. She's the head doctor at Georgetown. She's an ER doctor who's sports medicine trained. She'll tell you, you walk into the ER, they're going to do a different workup. We're not at the ER. We're at a first aid tent. Do we have a CT scanner at the first aid tent? Nope. We have a lot of help. We got the ability to get some vital signs. And so that's what we're going to do next. The most important vital sign, besides pulse and breathing, and a running situation is going to be a core temperature. We'll talk about core temperature, but if it's really high, you're going to go off to the heat stroke algorithm. If it's really low, you're going to go off to the hypothermia algorithm. And if it's just right, we're going to say you most likely have something called exercise-associated collapse. That's where all my blood in my 6'8" frame goes to my feet after I stop running. I finish, I'm like, yay, 3 hours, slowest half marathon ever. I start walking, blood to my feet, I fall over. So you have different algorithms. And you will see that some places in here we have asked the question, is this an adaptive athlete? We have wheelchair using athletes who are amazing. I love them. You know, like sometimes you talk to people and it's all like there's a reason they can't succeed. These folks succeed. They overcome. And so we take care of them a little bit differently because if they're confused, we want to think of some specific conditions they'll have, mostly autonomic dysfunction. We'll come back to that later. But this is our master algorithm. Dr. Ryan, any thoughts on the master algorithm? This is different. You're not going to see, this is not how you in urgent care, when you're extending for a physician, will do anything. Now I'm going to kind of pick up the pace here a little bit.
I think the only important thing to talk about is, what a normal person looks like after running a marathon, and to be like conscientious about that, because it's not like a normal person that just walks in. They all look bad. Most of them look like they're gonna fall over.
It's true. But if they have a pulse and they're breathing, shunt them down to the next decision. If they're thinking well, bye. You ran a race. You ran for 26 miles. You should feel tired. Okay. Now we're going to go into the ECC protocol quickly. We emphasize in sports medicine a lot of science, and we will have ALS ambulances usually on course. But our focus in these situations is high quality CPR, starting compressions, doing them to the 2 centimeters, rate of 100, 120, negative chest recoil, minimizing time off the chest, okay? That's high quality CPR. All the other fancy stuff, like that I get to learn when I'm rotating through my medical school, when do I use lidocaine? When do I use amiodarone? Look, I'm not saying you won't find a person using that at the finish line 10 if someone's dying, but they're gonna be an ALS ambulance, most likely, or one of our ER doctors. They're going to take over and do some high-level stuff. For us, it's the basics. What saves a life? Early CPR. What saves a life? Early electricity. What saves a life? Recognition of the problem, starting that CPR and doing it right. So you'll take a look at this and you're like, oh, there's no epinephrine anywhere. Does that upset you? Doesn't bother me either. I'm at a finish line. I'm already, the first time that someone falls out and they're like, hey, I got no pulse, I'm not breathing. Hello, give me my ambulance, Jay. Hook me up with an EMT that's gonna take this person from a first aid tent to a real hospital. So the role, interestingly, of our job is to maybe help the runners, but also take the 1,300 people who are gonna roll their ankle, get abrasions, have cramping, be tired, be pukey, and keep them out of the ER. Why? Dr. Ryan, why do we keep them out of the ER?
I'm crying.
We don't want to clog up the ER. What happens if your great Aunt Matilda has a stroke? What are they gonna do? Put her on divert? Move her another hour down the road? We want to absorb that for the community. Your role, you don't even know it, the person you'll never see, is the 55-year-old man with high cholesterol, high blood pressure, smokes, who woke up that morning with heartburn that was actually a heart attack, who had to go to the ER, that was open, that was available, because we didn't sandbag him with 20,000 runners. You feel good about what you're doing. If you take a look at this, first thing we're doing, someone comes in, no pulse, no breathing, there's a question of it, firing up EMS, calling for an AED. Doctors go all these courses for ACLS, and we have to recognize, is it VFib? Is it VTAC? Is it PEA? Yeah, it's important, we'll do that for you. But sometimes the most important thing is, get me an AED. Right, get that real quick. We used to do ABCs, now what is it? CABs, cardiac first. Okay, if they have a pulse, but they're not breathing, we're gonna give them a little rescue breath. God, it feels good to breathe as an asthmatic. And if they start breathing, we're still gonna send them to the ER because they weren't breathing. We're a first aid tent. We don't know why. What caused that? Don't know. We care, but we don't have the ability to care for them. So let's get them going. Let's get them moving. So that is what happens if they're not breathing but have a pulse, and that's more likely for a pediatric runner, by the way. PEDS codes are almost always respiratory, not always. Adults, you're gonna have two kind of folks who run into this. There's the 35-year-old and younger person who has some sort of cardiac anomaly they have no idea they have. Or there's gonna be someone like me who thinks they're a runner still, slightly hypertensive, perhaps overweight, loves to run that race, gonna have a heart attack. So that's coronary atherosclerosis. So when they're older, it's usually that. When it's younger, it's a heart problem. If they don't have a pulse, you're gonna start CPR, you're gonna put the AEDs on, and then we're gonna wait. We're gonna say, hey, is this something a shockable rhythm or not shockable rhythm? If it's shockable, they get electricity and we do our 5 cycles. After we start delivering that, we're waiting for the ambulance to come and send them off to someplace more advanced. If it's not shockable, okay, that particular problem doesn't need electricity. Do you have to know that it's asystole? I mean, you kind of know it's maybe that. Do you have to know it's pulseless electrical activity? No, it's not shockable. Just keep doing CPR until that ambulance crew comes and we get them going. Very simple. Now, I'll tell you right now, the reality is it's going to feel like forever. You're going to be doing compressions and you're like, oh man, CPR is hard. It is. Like, anyone ever done CPR here? Okay, yeah. So there's 4 or 5 of us. Jay, how's it feel to do CPR for 10 minutes?
My small body, not that great.
It's exhausting. It's hard work. So who here knows how to do CPR? Everyone's hand goes up. So when I start to fatigue after my 2 minutes, what's your name? Clara, on the end of this cycle, I'd like you to come in and switch out. Right? I'm counting. What's the song we're supposed to? Staying Alive. The American Heart Association actually has a Spotify list of songs that have a beat to 100 to 120, including Jenny from the Block, just to be a little cooler than I used to be. Whatever it is, call for help. You'll find this tent you're in might have like 10, 20, 30 people around you. If you're getting tired, dude, switch out. Okay, so we want to just also say you might see the doctors, focus on some other things. We're going to try to get this person going. So that's ECC. That's the top of the master algorithm. If you go back up, we take a look. Here's our master. AVPU. No pulse. No breathing. Off to the side. ECC algorithm. We're keeping it simple here, guys, right? This is stuff even I can do. Dr. Ryan, any commentary on emergency cardiac care?
No, unless you wanted to mention about how that actually has come into play in previous marathons.
You want to tell that story? You will see this happen. We'll keep moving because we got time constraints, but this is the thing you'll probably see. The rate is about 1 in 100,000. But if you think about it, Twin Cities was last weekend. Well, they canceled it, but it was last weekend, 20,000 runners. Chicago is this weekend, 30,000 runners. We'll have a mix, marathon and half, another 20. Oops, there's 100,000 runners close too. Let's throw in one more race. You might see this. This is the one you'll probably see. The good news is,
all different ages.
all different ages.
All different, people have trained, people have not trained.
Yep.
People would just decide to go out that day and run it.
Oh yeah, we were drinking last night. This guy told me he got COVID. He gave me his bib. I ran it for him. So you scan his bib and you're putting your information in and you're like, huh, this guy doesn't look like a Sophia. Maybe he is a Sophia. Can we ask him? Oh, he's not responsive. No pulse. Well, whatever, we're gonna go in. I mean, this is it. This is the one you'll probably see or be able to help with. Maybe you'll be the one documenting on RaceSafe. Maybe you'll be the one switching out for CPR. Do you need to do mouth to mouth? Everyone say it.
No.
Louder.
No.
Here we go. When we look at survival rates for CPR, it is lower for women, it is lower for Black and brown people because there's a stigma in our society. Sorry. People are like, oh, I don't want to give the mouth to mouth. You don't have to give mouth to mouth. Start the CPR. Put your phone on the side. Hey, Siri, call 911. Starting CPR. Look at your watch. 2 minutes ago, I started compressions on a 49-year-old male at mile 16. You guys will be at the finish line, but that's what I want you to think. Practice these kind of things in your mind, okay? Ooh, I want to go on to the next one. Any questions on cardiac before I move on? Excellent. Okay, so if we think about the master algorithm, let's say they have a pulse. Let's say they're breathing, but they're confused. They look a little strange. What's the vital sign I want you to get? A core temperature. Why can't I do the little cute ear temperature thing? It's not accurate. Are you sure I can't just do the little infrared forehead scanny thing? No. What about just the mouth? That's internal. That's mouth. No. Core temperature. What are the 2 core temperatures you could theoretically do? Rectal, esophageal. Are we going to do esophageal? No. Okay, so we will have data therms. How far does a rectal probe go in for someone who is totally obtunded, confused, who has a pulse, who's breathing?
6 inches.
Yeah, about 13 centimeters. Okay? If it breaks, if it doesn't work, you're probably not going to hurt them if you put them in ice. But this is nice because this is a data point. This helps us know, are you cold, are you hot, or are you normothermic? This is another one you'll see. When we have you working the finish line, we often will rotate you through right at the finish line. Okay, so we talked about the heart where the guy collapses immediately, no reflex, bloody face. This is the other one where they're going to actually collapse. You're going to see them. They're going to run. They're going to hit their little watch. Say, oh, pretty good. They're going to go like this. Oh, that was a bad run. Oh, that was a hilly. They're just going to sit there like, oh, that felt good. Stretch. And they're going to fall out. Why does that happen? Anyone know?
Blood drops to your
Because
legs.
they're,
Go ahead.
because there's no longer like muscles pulsating and pushing the blood back up.
Correct. So really, you almost have 2 hearts when you're running. Your big, normal 4-chamber cardiac heart is pumping the blood everywhere. And the muscles in your legs are pumping the blood back to the brain. When I stop pacing back and forth here, all the blood goes to my 6'8" shaft of blood to my feet. It's not my heart. It's not my brain. I get woozy, and I get something called EAC. Exercise associated collapse. So the best thing you can do to prevent this, what's your name?
George.
George, congratulations, good run. Please keep moving. The other thing they'll do is they'll take the selfie, phone out, right? They'll live stream it, they'll snapgram it, they'll whatever it is. And what's gonna happen is the blood goes to their feet, they get woozy, and they're gonna fall over. And now that's more work for us. Encourage them. Good job. Strong work. Please keep moving. We have bike barriers. Sometimes they'll get woozy, they'll kind of grab onto the bike barrier. Okay, how you doing? Let's keep walking. You can sometimes grab them, put an arm on them. Hey, good job. What was your time? First marathon? Worst time, best time? How's the weather out there? How's Aunt Matilda? Get them talking, get them thinking. If they can't answer the, what's going on? Okay, let's say they collapse. I want you to get their feet up. If the face is pale, raise their tail. Get their feet up, about 2 feet above them. You gonna hold me? Nope. So if you lay flat, yeah, that was brutal reality check there. If you lay them flat, the blood's still not there in their brain. You have to raise it up, and it'll go to their brain. What if you raise their feet up and they get better? What can we do? Hey, why don't you drink some water if you're thirsty, get some chips, kind of hydrate, keep their feet up, let them get a little more hydration in them. They'll be fine. However, what happens if you raise their feet and they don't improve. Well, maybe something else is going on, right? This would be a time to maybe call over, hey, I would like to check a glucose. Now, if this is in the chute, maybe we're moving them to the tent at this point. Or if you're near like the metals, we're moving them back towards one of the docks. We want to check other things. Maybe they said, now you don't know this, but some of the frat houses on the course serve alcohol, and they do it often these little like yard flamingos. They'll fill it up with rum, vodka, whatever. They clip the beak, and as people go by, they like pour it in their mouth. So maybe their confusion or problem is if you gotta smell them, you gotta assess them. Did you partake in any beverages on the course? You know, maybe you got an older runner, a lot of pain, loves running, really fulfills them. Maybe they took an extra 20 gummies to get through the pain. Like, ask them. I mean, we laugh, but like, look, guys, you're young, but when I run, it hurts. I love the running, but it hurts. Right, Mary? Yeah. I mean, what I do might not be called running anymore, in fact, but you ever see like, Richard Attenborough, massive Dr. Sedgley runs across the plane. Not really running, but. Okay, so you might be moving to a dehydration situation. You might find that what if they're diabetic? What if they have an insulin pump? What if they took their insulin this morning, forgot to eat because they were nervous or puked it up, and then they ran? Their blood sugar is gonna be 20, right? Maybe they were just like having the best day of their life. It's cool, it's windy, they're like, I'm not stopping for water. I'm just gonna keep running. And then I get to the end after 26 miles and they're dehydrated. Okay, so exercise-associated collapse is quickly getting their feet up. If they get better, awesome. Have some salty snacks, have some fluid, they'll pop right up, you sit them up, it's like, oh, I feel better now. Cool, bye. They don't get better, why not? This is your normothermic case. And this is kind of one you sometimes will circle back to after you have treated somebody and they're like, not quite right, and you're like, ooh, you need to think about other things. So, any questions on this one? Sometimes you won't find out what it is and it's time to call the ambulance and send them bye-bye. Question?
Yeah, I just have a question that if you are unable to take like a rectal or I guess esophageal temperature, like for example, if you're doing like the medical running and you're out on the course and you're like not necessarily right by a medical tent, is there like a plan B, just like a best proxy for if you want to report to the medical
Phone a
team
friend.
there?
Phone a friend. So we have medical runners. They actually are supposed to run with their phone. It's awkward because if you run, it's not a lot of pockets. But you phone a friend immediately. We have an incident command center. Right there, we have the ability to push bike teams with AEDs towards you. We have the ability to push ambulances towards you. So the other thing is Dr. Ryan and I are the sports medicine directors. We have 2 top-notch emergency room physicians. Eric Omley, the chief down at Olney Hospital. He's been doing this with me for 9 years or something. Sharon Zwicky, she's also been one of the ER doctors in the tent for, again, probably 9 years. They're solid. She runs races too herself. So deep knowledge there, call for help. It's kind of like when you don't know the answer, phone a friend. When you take a test here at Towson and you don't know the answer, if you turn next to me and you look at my answer and you're like, what's your name? Will. You're like looking at Will's answer. That's cheating. Don't do that. Boo. But in real life, if you're in the marathon and you're like, I need help, Will's gonna say, I got your back, man. That's collaboration. So no cheating here in the classroom. Out in the real world, sharing is caring. Yeah, you're gonna phone a friend. You're never alone. If you feel alone, Kelly and I have failed because we're always pairing you with leadership, your professor, one of our athletic trainers from MedStar Health. You're never alone. I'm pretty easy to find at the finish line, but if you're on the course and really you're like, oh man, there's nothing here, 911, what's your emergency? Hi, I'm on the marathon course, the cross street of 5th and M. Patients down and confused, I need an ambulance right away. I did have someone one time get very creative. We had a heat stroke, mile 25-ish, 24-ish. It was one of our sports medicine docs. We knew it was a hot day. She actually, I think, had a tarp but we need more ice. I think she went into a bar and said, I need as much ice as you can. Someone might be dying of heat stroke. Everyone was like, give her the ice. And like, everyone was clapping. You know, she put the guy, person lived. You might have to be a little MacGyver, but you're never alone. And that's, you know, I've had courses where in the middle of nowhere, we had a hot, humid day. We ran out of ambulances. Yeah, there's something called mutual assist where you call the next ambulances further away. Yeah, that's bad. When you're doing that, it's tough. So we did that, but the one guy calls me, he's like, I'm at mile 13. This guy looks like he has heat stroke. I don't have a rectal temp. He's confused. He has a pulse. I'm like, describe where you're at. He's like, I'm right next to a creek. I'm like, put him in the creek. Support his head. You're not going to do any damage if he's got a pulse and he's breathing. Because could it be exercise-associated collapse? It could, but you're in the middle of the course, probably not. And if they're cold, that's actually better than being hot. We won't go into all the details, but hot will kill you quickly. Cold, we can always warm you back up. That person in the creek made it. So you can be creative, but call for help. You shouldn't have to make some major executive decision. It's a great question. Any thoughts on that? All right, we're gonna keep going through here because I would like to hit some high points.
I guess the only other thing is, you know, let's say for, you know, someone who is too hot, right? There's certainly a consideration to get them to one of the medical tents where you can cool them before transport, because they're gonna not necessarily have the capability. So calling the command center or calling one of us at the finish line to help figure out logistics wise of whether to get them to the closest medical tent and have EMS pick them up from there, or to have EMS. So we also have gators out on the course that can help to move people around, but if it's not ideal situation, just always call us. But of course, you can call 911 in the meantime as well.
Yeah, so we augment the city's ambulance corps by buying private ambulances to help staff where we think there's the most need. That includes, you know, ALS ambulances, gators. The city has bike teams. Let us use those resources, but we don't know if you need it till you call us. Okay, so we talked about heat a little bit. I'm gonna actually focus on this algorithm, and then we'll pick up the pace a little bit, because the other algorithms I think are something I'd like you guys to look at and you can spend more time with. But the guy who's in charge of the Houston Marathon, he calls the H-bombs the big things you want to care about. Is it your heart? Is it heat? Is it hyponatremia? Right? These are the things that are going to kill you. So those, and they're very specific to race medicine. In this case, hyperthermia, this person's confused, they have a pulse, they're breathing, but their temperature is 104 and they're confused. They have some sort of central CNS dysfunction. Life is not good for them right now. And this is someone who will die if we don't do the right thing. However, 100% of the time, they'll make it if you do the right thing. It's where you can go home and be like, I made a difference. In this algorithm, you want to get their shoes off. You want to get, to a certain degree, anything else that's keeping warmth in. Maybe they ran in a rain jacket because it was pouring at the beginning of the race and they're running that race no matter what. Cool them down by getting stuff off. Getting them into ice water submersion to rapidly cool is the key. Who here has seen the movie Titanic? Really? Oh, girl, we gotta work on you. Jack, yeah, you. Have you seen Titanic?
I fell asleep 5 minutes ago.
Okay, fair enough. It's not for everybody.
Woke up at the end, I was like, I don't know what's happening, but okay.
Well, I'll ruin it for you. Jack dies. Spoiler alert. His girlfriend lives. She says she'll never let go. I'll give you one guess what she does. She lets go. Now, we all laugh at that because it's funny and it's a great movie. But why did Jack Dawson in the water after the Titanic goes in the water? And Rose, who's on top of the water in the North Atlantic, she is soaking wet. There is wind. Her petticoat is frozen, if you notice. You can see her breath. I'll never let go. Why does she live? I mean, remember, like, everyone else is dying around her of hypothermia. Why does she live and Jack dies? Thermodynamics, okay? Because I could have gone into thermodynamics for the last 5 minutes. Everyone would have fallen asleep as soon as I said that, right? If I talk about delta thermal changes, boo. Jack dies because he has something called conductive heating loss. The heat inside his body is being pushed out the fastest because he's in ice water, which is what we do. We put people in ice water if we can. Studies show out of the Corey Stringer Institute that cold water immersion is probably the best thing you can do. It may not be an option you have if you run across something like this, but at our race, we're going to try to have that available where we think it's possible. Rose lives because she's not getting conductive heat loss. She's having evaporative heat loss. Now, while you're running, evaporative heat loss is how you lose heat. Conductive is much faster. And it's not the total temperature. You'll see people with rectal temperatures of 105, 107, 109, 111. But the temperature is not as bad as actually just being above 105 for a long period of time. And I've had runners be in the ice water, totally out of it, for over 45 minutes. And you're stirring the ice water as your hands are frozen. And they'll wake up and they'll say something like, "Did I have heat stroke again?" Yeah. So you're actively cooling. If you can get them to wake up and be fine and their mental status comes up, their temperature comes to about 102. We'll pop them out of the ice, and if they stay there, then they'll get to go to the ER. I send my heat strokes to the ER. You don't know if they don't have concomitant rhabdomyolysis. You don't know if they have concomitant other problems. I don't have stat labs that matter at my finish line. We have had people at Baltimore, we pop them out, and immediately afterwards, they start shooting back up again to 104, 105, 106. Turns out, people take Adderall to run faster. Turns out, people get COVID or other viruses, and they're like, "Dude, I trained for 20 some weeks. I am running this race." Cough, cough. It's just a fever of 101. I'm running this thing. So if they pop back up, you're back in the water. If they won't go down ever, that's a problem. We'll have to call for help. However, most people are gonna drop down, stay down, and then we get to send them to the hospital. If you don't take them out of 102, hey guys, we're getting close to 102, you can push them into hypothermia. They'll be cold. You're gonna warm them up. That's always a little bit embarrassing, but no one dies from that. Larry Atkinson has joined us.
Okay.
The actual lecture's begun now. So here's what I'm gonna tell you. This one is one you can totally save a life if you do it right. And I think this is if you have one algorithm to really focus on. The other key thing is we don't transport till they're cool. Treat first, transport second. Kelly Ryan, any thoughts there? To me, this is a big one. Remember, if you have an adaptive athlete, you might have to help them get out of a wheelchair. They may have a level of paralysis where they can't feel. They can't, they're confused. They can't, describe their situation, support their head. You don't know what their level of disability is. They're actually at sometimes higher risk if you have wounded warriors with burns from IEDs. That skin does not regulate heat very well. So be aware of these special situations. And I think the reality is, to me, this is the one where you're when you can be part of it, you feel the best. You leave that day and you're like, yeah, we did this right. They had 40 cases of this at the Falmouth Road Race. 100% survivability.
I guess I would say, just in preparation for this, when you see it, just prepare yourself. Make sure to keep yourself safe because sometimes the patients can be a little bit combative. Also, when you drop an angry, confused person into a bucket of ice, essentially, and submerge their body, they might start fighting you initially. Sometimes their mental status changes that they're non-responsive, pretty lethargic, but sometimes they can also be the opposite, which is very agitated and will start swinging, and things of that nature. So, just be mindful of that. And then also one of the other things I think you did mention, was just sometimes you have to be a little bit creative based off of body sizes, based off of the team sizes, making sure that if they really are, pretty lethargic, that you try to make sure that their head stays, out of the water. So you might have to have someone support them from the head, and then take turns on the side, moving and pulling the water. But you can also take turns because it can be very tiring and you might be there for a couple minutes.
We have a dedicated doctor for the heat deck But that doesn't mean we might pull you from an MSK area or another area and just say, guys, this is going on for 45 minutes. I need you to come move some water. My hands are totally frozen. If they clear up, temperature is fine, but they're still confused, check their glucose. Look, did they hit their head? Maybe they need a head CT. We had one last year, which is going to speak to us. We had a heat stroke victim that we saved. She's actually going to address us in the tent and say thank you this year. And she's going to run again. So we're super psyched about that. Now the flip side of heat stroke, hypothermia. I'm going to do this one quickly. I used to work and live in Minnesota. We saw this one a lot. We don't see this as much. We often see this when we have people who stay in and they're like, oh, I don't want to get out of the ice. It feels good. I'm no longer heat stroked. I want to sit here for another minute or two. And then they're like 102, 101, 100. And they fall off a cliff and it's like 98, 95, 89. You can see hypothermia also just on cold, rainy days. We were at Boston the year that Des Linden won. I had 5 sweaters on. I was cold. We had people coming in with rectal temperatures in the 80s. Key thing with this on this algorithm is if it's mild, give them some warm soup, get them out of their wet clothing. Remember Jack Dawson, cold, pushing heat off. Don't be like Jack. Don't be like Rose, really. If it's mild, you're gonna be okay. They're gonna pop right back. They're gonna warm up with some warm soup, get them a fresh t-shirt, they're good. If it's moderate, we may actually have to put a warm blanket on them. If it's severe, we may need to actually get them to a hospital to get what we call a bear hugger and some warm IV. This is one where a core temperature can be helpful as well. And I'll tell you, with those little Mylar blankets that they give out at the end, you can warm those up sometimes just by pouring hot water on them and then putting them on the patient. But getting them out of their wet clothing is key, warming them is key. We don't see this one as much.
We will try to have some like dry t-shirts there and stuff if people need it.
Yep. The other thing is with cold patients, if you do run into a hypothermic patient, and we will have Johns Hopkins cardiology is sending some of their residents to work with us. There are specific EKG findings that are kind of cool. You don't want to have them, you just want to see them. And you want to be gentle with these folks, right? Like, I'm a little klutzy 6'8" guy. What you don't want to do is be like, oh, hey, how's it going? Oh, my bad. Hey, that's all right. You bump into that cot and their myocardium's cold, you can throw them into VFib. And now you've got to resuscitate them. Myocardium that's cold is not a happy heart. So we want to be gentle. Always be aware of that. Any questions on cold algorithm, hypothermia?
I will say we've had both in the same day too at
Yep.
Baltimore too. It was a hot day, people had finished earlier, or they were, and then the wind and rain came through, so everybody was wet, and then it got cloudy and very windy, and then those last people came in and were freezing. So temperatures can change, and all of those heat loss things come into play. 'Cause you can have
Yeah, you'll be cold when we first get there at 5 in the morning. And by the time we're about to bug out at 3, the sun's out, it's humid. It's a whole different race for someone who's slow like myself, starting off. I mean, the other thing is, remember the half doesn't start till like 8:45, 9:45. It's very late for half. They're out there freezing, not making any energy. Then they're running, making heat, and then it gets hotter, usually. But we've had rainstorms, we've had wind. It's exciting out there. I love it. Be prepared. Remember, take care of yourselves. If you need to have a little glucose, we'll have food for you. We'll have beverages, but bring what you need and dress appropriately. We don't want this to be you. I never want to be like the guy with Kelly Ryan's like, hey, you ran it this year. I'm taking care of you because I got cold. So the last of the algorithms that I'm going to cover, and you guys will have the list to review all of them, is another one you'll see, and it's exercise associated cramping. So crampers cramp. It's why they cramp is kind of like a whole nother lecture. But the reality is you're going to see a lot of this. And I want you to be careful with this one. Because you may be working with the recovery zone with the PTs. You may be in the finish line tent. You may be on the course somewhere. And you got to always think, is it just plain old cramping? Because people will cramp sometimes, but they have other problems. They'll start off with cramping, and then they get nauseous, and then they get chest pain, and they feel clammy, and their jaw's numb, their arms numb, and suddenly we're talking like a coronary syndrome. So it's sometimes nice to like touch base with people. Hey, how's it going? How you feeling? Because we want to make sure this is actually this. We don't want to make the mistake of saying, oh, cramper, and walking away. So you'll see, or if they're ambulating, a lot of times we'll just be like, hey, how about you stretch it out? Because sometimes getting down on a cot that's this far off the ground, after they run 26 miles, good luck, you know, they're gonna like get worse sometimes. So if they're walking and they can kind of handle it, sometimes we'll be like, you wanna just like do a standing stretch? And we will have physical therapy. You can help with a 2-joint stretch. But we also wanna make sure, hey, are you hydrated well? I like to offer them some salty beverages, like a hot broth, an electrolyte drink, something like that. And I wanna make sure there's nothing else going on, because if their cramps get better, bye, you're doing great, thank you for running. If the cramps don't get better, now I wanna ask myself, is this baseline that I'm talking to seeming normal to me, but not really normal for that runner? Could they be hyperthermic? Could they be confused? Could they be hypothermic? Are they diabetic? Are there other things going on here? We've had some major people in sports medicine help out with the Marine Corps Marathon, and we were talking to somebody, and they're like, oh my gosh, let's get the rectal thermometer. They're not looking so hot. Well, the mom came in and was like, no, this is just how Matt looks. Matt talks like this. He's a big Battlestar Galactica fan. He's going on about this because he thinks it's cool. And really, the remake is very cool if you haven't watched it. But the reality is, you might have to check a baseline. Hey, do you have a phone on you? Can I phone a friend? Is your wife or girlfriend or mother available or best friend? Did you run with anybody? Kelly Ryan, is this how Matt Sedgley normally is? You know, I see bib number 10 is Matt Sedgley. Is this how he normally is? That's just him. Okay, it's cramping. But cramping is one of those ones where I want you to kind of like have your little spidey sense up and ask the question, could this be something else? Any thoughts on that one?
Carissa.
Oh, you will see this all day. This is what you guys, so as we change how we're doing our medical teams, this is a lot of what you guys are gonna be asked to do. You'll be cramping, you'll be helping with massaging, stretching, getting the salty snacks, helping document with this, but this is a lot of what our role as athletic trainers are being pulled over to the medical teams, and that's what we'll be doing. And it will be a large part of what we do, so.
And when your spidey sense does go off because you've given them a salty snack and you've given them a beverage and they're not getting better, I want you to find one of the docs and say, I got a cramp who's not getting better. Can you come over, let's talk about it? Because this right here is the one that you see with runners who are usually petite, usually female, usually took a bunch of ibuprofen, usually are slower runners because they're on the course forever, and they stop at every single stop, and they're like, got their 2 big drinks, and they, I'm going slow enough, I'll get 4 more, and they got their Camelback, and they're pounding the water all the way through the course, and they're acutely driving their sodium down. That's called hyponatremia. Exercise-associated hyponatremia is completely different than when I go to the ED and they call me and they're like, hey, your 85-year-old patient from the nursing home is here. They're very confused. We don't know if they fell. CT is negative. Sodium's 120. And I look and they're on, NSAIDs, they're on SSRIs, and they're on all these medicines that slowly, over time, bring down their sodium. That's someone you would never ever want to rapidly give sodium to. It'll make their brain swell and they'll die. Not in our world. All our runners start the day happy. They're like, I'm gonna run a race. And then they ran it slowly, drinking a lot of fluids, and there's a case out of San Diego, I believe the person drank 7 liters of water. And the mistake was early on in marathon medicine, we were like, oh, let's give them a IV of fluids. Oops, now we're up to 8 liters. So when you see someone who has headache, nausea, vomiting, swelling, salt caked on their face, cramping that won't get better, think hyponatremia. We have in the finish line tent a CLIA certified individual as we float the certificate to the tent under the ED who will check their labs. No one gets an IV in the tent without having a sodium. Can anyone get an IV in the tent without a sodium? Can hear it? No. Can they?
No.
Can they? Camden's not here. I bet he knows too, though. It's okay to give IV fluids if the person's got no blood pressure. It's okay if they're crumping from sepsis or a heart attack. But if you got someone who's just like, oh, I ran a race, give me 2 IVs, how about you drink some electrolyte-rich fluids? But even then, I want you to see if they're confused. Maybe not. Maybe I want to just check that sodium real quick. Because newsflash, sports electrolyte drinks, are they hypertonic or hypotonic? Yeah, they're mostly water. There's some sugar. And there's ones that have a little bit more sugar and a little bit more salt. But who here has gone to the beach in the last 3 years? Did you ever like get some of the water in your mouth? Was that yummy or yucky? Yucky. That's the same salinity as human blood. We are from the ocean. Some many million years ago or 6,000 years ago or however it happened. That same salinity is what's in our blood. Anything less than that dilutes it. So when people are pounding their sports electrolyte drink, they're like, oh, but I got sodium. Well, you got about 14, versus 140. It's a tenth of it. Because if you try to, like, anyone ever take a salt tab on a race? Yeah, anything to stop cramping. Some people will do it. It sometimes works. It's unclear why. I'm not opposed to it per se, but the reality is, I want you thinking of this. We try to restrict them from having those hypotonic solutions. Don't drink water, please. We try to give them hypertonic broth. We'll have a salty, warm broth. We try to encourage them to eat like pretzels. I think they're gross, but my wife loves them. But like some sort of cracker with salt or something. And salt will then help equalize things. If they're not getting better, you can always get to the point of care sodium analysis. And based on that, if it's severe, one of the physicians, usually your doctor, myself, or Kelly Ryan, will give the thumbs up and we'll push hypertonic saline. I know I just kind of like got into hospital medicine a little bit, but remember they acutely got low, so we can acutely pop them back up. And every bump of the 3% saline gives them like 2 or 3 points. So if you're at 120 and you want to be above that, you may even have to give them a second bump. And I've seen this in ultramarathons. I've seen this in marathons. You don't see it in shorter races because you got to run for a long time to drink for a long time. So if they get better, great. You can discharge them, but they have to do one thing before you discharge them. You guys are smart. I'm gonna sit down soon. Now, if they don't get better, maybe something else is going on. Send them to the ED. You don't have to figure out everything. This is not like when you get admitted to the internal medicine ward and we're gonna round for 7 hours and talk about, could this be renal tubular acidosis 2 versus 4? We're gonna let those experts do that in the hospital, but we're gonna try to triage again, keeping the majority of people out of the hospital, out of the ED. One of the people who wanted to be on the live feed on YouTube today just texted, like, sorry, last patient had a subarachnoid hemorrhage. They're also on Eliquis. They're bleeding in their brain. We're tubing them. Like, that's the person I want them handling. I can take the crampers who just need some salty snacks. Right? We want to make our emergency department people love us. Give us a little card at the end. Thank you. And that's also for the community. Now, that being said, one last thing I'll say before I let Kelly do some case studies and we'll do a break. We've had people walk into the tent and say, oh, I saw you have a red cross on this tent. I think my husband's having a stroke. That's happened twice in the last 7 years. Yeah, or I was walking, trying to watch my daughter run, and I broke my ankle. Come on in, we can help you, we'll start the process. We actually at our finish line have a MedStar urgent care in the Inner Harbor. We cannot take the ambulance and drop them off there. We can gator them to the front door and they can walk themselves in. But we have the ability again to offload the needs of the runners away from the ED, away from the hospital, and service the community. And that's what you're doing when you do these algorithms. So I'm gonna pause here, just throw a lot at you guys. You guys are intense. You guys are smart. I like it.
Paul, do you have any questions?
Any questions from anyone out there? You guys know this already. You're Your professors are amazing. Anything on Zoom? I see nothing in the chat for the YouTube Live.
Josh, do you have anything to add? Oh, that was one thing, a lot of you guys may also be helping out like in the recovery tent, or our dynamic duo over here had to do quite a few transfers from. We just, they just thought that they were cramping, and so they were hanging out at our recovery zone with our physical therapist, but when they didn't stop cramping, then we realized that they needed probably higher medical care, so then they were transferred from the recovery zone over to our medical tent for further attention. So I think really, yeah, the difference between just a cramper versus like a hyponatremia is really important. And if you feel like you've been working with someone for a while and they're not recovering, then that's when you might need to think a little bit outside the
I
box.
kind of have a 20-minute clock spinning, when I see somebody. You should be able to turn around in 20 minutes, even if you had a bad day on the course. If you're at the 20-minute mark, I tell people, hey, can you get up, please? Because we want to see if you can get up. If not, we'd like to move you to our intensive medical care unit where there's ambulance and emergency room physicians. A lot of times people are like, oh, no, I don't want that. Right? Gotta keep moving. Gotta get them moving.
I'm sorry, Josh, what were you gonna say?
Can people hear me or?
Yeah, everyone can hear you.
Yeah, I can hear you loud and clear.
Yeah, the recovery zone is a little bit beyond the finish line medical tent for those that haven't done it before. So we hope that, the real serious cases, have already made their way into the medical tent, but many people will get past there that still may have issues. And we will see several hundred in the recovery zone. Most coming in that are fine and just, want to be stretched, or they have a little, man, my IT band was bothering me beforehand and it's still bothering me. Can you do a little stretch me out? There's a lot of that, but there's plenty that as soon as they stop, turn into crampers. So we'll show you at the beginning of the morning some neural tension techniques and gentle active stretching, some of the manual stuff we'll do to try to help them if their own active stretching isn't doing it. And we're gonna work this year in a way that we have 3 or 4 students to each PT. So we'd like the students to be very hands-on. But again, you won't need to phone a friend, you'll have a friend right there. So if there's any concerns that things are going wrong, you're not gonna be left independent, but we do want you to get some hands-on learning from this. So we'll have a lot of tables, we'll have a big grass area, we'll have stretching straps, we'll have foam rollers, we'll have, that kind of recovery. We'll have a lot of Normatec boots, which is great, and actually takes a fair amount of manpower to just get people in and out of those and wipe them down and keep them charged. So we'll be doing that fun stuff, interacting with runners right beside where we've also got some that you never know, they could turn bad. So you really gotta stay on your toes. It goes from, like you talked about earlier, Matt, that very calm, we haven't had many people coming through here, to just berserk for a while. And a line of people waiting for you, and triage is tough. So it's a very dynamic day. So we're looking forward to having more students and good support for all of you out there.
It's true. Thank you, Josh.
Mhm.
Kelly, do you wanna talk about how it's gonna be set up this year, later after you guys do case studies, kind of letting them know?
Yeah, we can do this.
Okay.
Yeah, so what we'll do is, why don't we take a hard 5-minute break? Be back here sharp. If you need to take a restroom break or get some fluids. 6:15, let's get back. I wanna give us time to go through some cases. And then at the very end, maybe 15, 20 minutes for Jay to walk you through RaceSafe. Any questions about the algorithms? All right, there's a few we didn't cover. Read them on your own. I have a phone call, email away if you guys need more, okay? Thank you.
10%. 6%.
5-minute break.
Huge power stripper.
Oh. Yeah. There you go.
I can assist.
Let's get at it.
Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah. Here we go, here we go.
Here we go now.
So they're gonna.
So, got the first hour live stream, and then, but we had
Yes, and then
a number. For those of you who are on the YouTube live, thank you, we see you. Just give us a few minutes here for the folks in the room to replenish. If you have a question, feel free to put anything into the chat, or you can text myself if you have it. We can always send a message via the YouTube channel. If you have questions, we'll try to address them later. All right, we are coming back. Everyone feeling rejuvenated? Bathroom break, water, coffee, some little snack, a salty snack. You're really cramping, you're really headache. No hyponatremia here in the classroom. So what we want to do is, we covered about half the algorithms. Again, I encourage you to look through all those. I can always come back. You guys want me to cover the other ones? We can probably do it after the race. I really am excited about the adaptive athlete one. I think that's an underserved population that
Recording in progress.
for so many people, like, they just don't feel comfortable doing it, and you need to be. We're happy to, on the race day, teach. You're not just there as slave labor. We want you to actually learn. So you should have someone there like you're working with teaching you. That's our primary goal. We will talk about kind of not specific assignments, but the layout and where we're often at. But I want to take the next, call it 20 minutes, and let Dr. Ryan run through some cases now that I've taught you the algorithms. See if you can recognize what the problem is. See what we're going to do about it. So we're going to take the knowledge we learned, synthesize that, evaluate, see if we can't learn in a different way. So the recall is over, and now we're going to higher level learning. You guys ready? Man, when I start off, you guys are really great. You guys ready?
Yeah.
All right.
That's the excitement.
Dr. Ryan, they're all yours.
Okay, so we're just gonna kind of go over a couple common case scenarios. We already talked about a lot of them, but things that are different for race medicine that we think of differently. I mean, to be honest with you, this is almost more your wheelhouse than a lot of the, like the hospital providers that we have working with us, whether it be the nurses, whether it be, the ER doctors. But taking care of patients outside of the hospital is something that you guys are very good at. But specifically for runners, you want to think about, again, the ones we already talked about: hyponatremia, hyperthermia, exercise-associated collapse, cramping, and then you always have to consider the other things, because sometimes it's not just a runner that is sick, but it might also be a typically sick person who is going out and running. So anytime that you have a collapsed runner, like Dr. Sedgley had already mentioned, you definitely want to make sure that you do your basics, an initial eval, keep the runners moving. This is actually when you get a nice chance to talk to patients. You actually feel a little bit rude sometimes, like, come on, let's get up, run, like, let's keep walking. They're like, I just ran a marathon, let me sit here. You're like, no, we gotta keep moving. And that is certainly for their benefit and also for your benefit, because then you don't have to do more work when they actually do collapse. Always make sure to keep an eye out for mental status, hydration status, and then also kind of get an idea while you are talking to them. Important things and important information is, hey, is this your first marathon? How many have you run? Were you adequately trained? How much have you been drinking out on the course? Did you stop at every single station? What kind of things did you have out? Did you take any of those goos? Have you taken any type of nutrition? Did you eat this morning? Did you eat last night? Those types of questions are always very helpful. So again, this is our general this is our general approach to an athlete, and we already went through that. Case scenario one, I know that try not to look at them. Oh, you guys don't have them up there. Do you want to go through?
Yeah.
Do you need a clicker?
Oh yeah, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay, actually, don't pull up scenario one yet. So, patient collapses at mile 24, 35-year-old male. This is his second marathon. Thanks. He had time of 3 hours at the time of collapse at mile 24. He seems confused, combative, and he has poor color. His blood pressure is 90/50. His heart rate's 120, which of course you might expect as he is running. But his temperature is 106. So what would be your differential diagnosis? Yes. He's hot.
Down arrow.
Oh, down arrow.
It was working earlier.
Okay. So yes, our first patient, you would be concerned about heat stroke. Remember, core temperature greater than 104, and some some changes in mental status. There's always these patients that come in that their temperature might be a little bit elevated, they might be a little bit confused, but still kind of with it, those are kind of borderline calls. And for those, I will consult one of our physicians, but at the end of the day, if you have concern about a patient who might not necessarily meet the criteria of 104 degrees, but they seem like they're a little bit altered, please put them in the ice bath. Please just treat them. We'll deal with everything else later, but like in that particular instance, and we did actually have one of these actually out on the course last year who was a little bit borderline, just because they don't necessarily meet the criteria. If they meet the picture, go ahead and dump them, and go ahead and cool them, because the consequences of not cooling them, is much higher than making them too cold. And,
Dr. Ren, this
Yes.
should work hopefully for you.
oh, did you
Write down that.
Oh, that one, okay, sorry. The other thing is things have changed recently, and actually Jay might even be the best person to talk about this, but if you would like to put some input, and you guys as athletic trainers know that once the AMBO gets there, they wanna transport the patient, right? But of course, cool first, transport second. You need to get the patient cool before you transport, and luckily now things have actually started to change. But certainly, being an advocate for your patient, and it's funny because I've had multiple of my mentors who mentioned to me, if someone is trying to transport a patient that you don't feel comfortable with them transporting because it's a heat stroke and that they should be cooled first, always ask to call a supervising physician and then fumble until the patient's cool enough to actually be transported. And that's how we deal with that out in the field if you have to. But please, by all means, if you ever need to call me for that case, I'd be happy to back you up. I'm sure Dr. Sedgley would say the same.
Yeah, absolutely. So 2 quick thoughts on that. If you have a situation, and I'm not saying this will happen ever again, because it used to be a problem, EMS wants to take a patient from you for heat stroke, and they're like, give me the patient, we're gonna leave if you don't give us the patient. You can say, I wanna talk to your medical director. This will probably not engender feelings of happiness, but between the group, but every ambulance actually has a medical director, 24/7, and they can get them on the line and say, hi, it's Dr. Sedgley, I have Jay Yang here, he's acting strange, his temperature is 107, I'm actively cooling, I'd like to cool first and then transport, per MEMS protocol. What's MEMS, Jay?
Yeah, don't call on me like that, but Dr. Sedgley and Dr. Ryan is absolutely correct. So about 2 years ago, we changed our threshold to 102 being pretty much the transport threshold for us. So again, our protocols very clearly state that if they're being actively cooled by any sports medicine or anything like that at a sports event, we are to stay until they reach at least 102, then we can even consider treating and transporting at that point.
Because does the ER have what you have to cool?
No.
No, they gotta go get a body bag from the morgue. They gotta go to the kitchen for ice. You are the person who's treating it. That's what you need.
So say like if you have a rectal thermometer in and it's showing they're above 102, usually you're not gonna have anyone fight you on an EMS squad. They're usually gonna be like, cool, you're cooling, you have a rectal in, we can see the number. Where you get a little bit of gray area is when you don't have a rectal thermometer or you didn't put one in and you just cooled somebody. Then you have a little bit of gray area where they're gonna wanna transport as quickly as possible and you don't necessarily have something concrete to say they're not cooled long enough. But if their mental status and everything has changed from being not good to better, then you have that to go off of. If they are, that's just a little bit of a gray area. Like when you don't have something concrete to show the EMS providers that you have that. We had an incident just recently with an umpire at Ripken. We hadn't even started cooling yet. He probably should have been cooled. He was probably in heat exhaustion, not heat stroke. But the AMBO just refused to even talk to us and just took them. And when we were asking about ways to cool them, they just didn't even answer us. And that's where you get a little bit of gray area when you don't have a concrete number. We didn't actively get a chance to start cooling yet, and they just wanted to take. So that was one of those incidences where it was a little bit of a more difficult situation. But if you have a rectal in and you're cooling someone, EMS is not going
That's
to
clear
like,
cut.
they're not gonna grab somebody out of the water and take them away.
No,
Fear not, we have plenty of rectal thermometers all out on the course. And we have, like I said, we have our later tents, we also have the capabilities for cold water immersion if needed out on the course for the higher tents as well. So, don't worry, there's Datatherms everywhere. Cool first, transport second. Remember that you want to cool to ideally 102. And actually, whether or not they really need to be transported is debatable, and that could be a whole nother lecture. Ideally, if they recover pretty well and there's a responsible person there available to help discharge them, then in theory, we should be able to let them go. Now, that being said, typically from our tent, that is a decision based off of the medical director at the time. But a lot of times we will often send them to the hospital even just for some basic labs or further evaluation. Now, in Boston, that's completely not true, and they will have them go along their merry own way, even after being completely, obtunded, recovered, and then see you later. But they also, they have seen this quite frequently, and most of them and all of them have done really well. Just a couple of things. Remember that we do want to get rectal temperatures as best as possible. We do understand that there might be some limitations out on the course. And at the time you do what you can do with what you have. So just be conscientious about this. But where you guys are located, you guys should have access to these capabilities. And remember that you want to continue to move the water because once they've been sitting, and that might actually be one of your biggest jobs that you'll ever have is, sticking your arm in that very cold tub and making sure to circulate that water until your arm goes numb. But just remember that you're saving a patient's life. So again, ice water immersion, there's a couple different ways, but we do have those big troughs and we'll be submerging them. Considerations for discharge. Remember that we had talked about making sure that they have someone reliable to go home, but this will be on a case-by-case basis, so we won't necessarily have to go too much into that. God, that this is not moving, but mine is moving. There we go. Sorry. Okay, case scenario number 2. So you have a runner who collapses in the runner's village, 38-year-old female, first marathon. Finish time, this is one of the key points in this scenario. Finish time was 5 hours and 30 minutes. Complaints of headaches, nausea, and swelling. Took ibuprofen prior to the race, had some Gatorade and water at each water stop because she was doing her due diligence. And she thought that is what she was supposed to do because someone told her that was a good idea. She looks pale, she's slightly confused. What is your what's your highest differential diagnosis on this one? Except that it says it on there. Okay, just say it. What are your key points in this particular scenario that kind of point you towards this? Yeah, because she's been out there for a long time, overconsumption of fluids, she's sweating salt, she's been out there and she just keeps drinking. The natural breakdown of muscle occurs when running a marathon, causes production of cytokines. This then stimulates the production of vasopressin or antidiuretic hormone. And so, there's a progressive dilution of the serum electrolytes. And there's a couple different stages to this. Most of this we won't see out on the course. Actually, I think Boston said that they didn't have any case. They had 0 cases last year of hyponatremia, true hyponatremia, on the course in Boston last year, which they had some mimickers and maybe some very early stages of exertional hyponatremia, but no one that was significant enough to need any type of intervention other than smashing salty chips, drinking a salty broth. The other thing though is, listen, when a patient is kind of a little bit off and they're complaining about nausea, the last thing that they want to do is eat pretzels or eat salty chips. But that's really the thing that you need to explain to them, is that it actually is helping to treat you, even though you might not necessarily want to eat it. So here, have these salty chips. And again, continuing to encourage them. This is when we do not want to drop an IV in somebody, which is kind of almost a gut reaction for people who work in the ER, right? They pretty much put IVs on anybody that feels terrible. So here you have a runner coming into your tent they feel bad, they just ran, they've been out there for a while, so it's almost like natural to kind of think of dehydration. But again, now that we had this lecture, you're all gonna think about this one. And the other key here is patient was taking ibuprofen. There was a couple of years ago that we actually kept some ibuprofen out on the course because guess what? When you run 26 miles, sometimes you have some muscle aches and pains and you just need to get to the end. But what we do not have anymore on the course now is ibuprofen, and we just keep Tylenol because the NSAID use is one of the things that can actually increase your risk factor, increase your risk for this particular condition. Also changes in heat of extremes, heat or cold. So we already went through our algorithm, but again, encouraging them to have salty snacks or drinks, trying to get their nausea better, and just continuing to encourage these. It's really fascinating to watch someone turn around from this and you're like, oh, this is it. This is what they told me was gonna happen. And they do turn around pretty quickly.
You would be surprised at the number of people you ask, oh, how much did you drink out on the course? And they're like, I drink at every station. And
They're so proud of themselves.
And you're like, I'll be right back. And then you like come back with like all the salty things to say, which one do you want to have? But when they are nauseous, I would say the chicken broth is probably the thing that is the most palatable because they also are thirsty. Like they feel like they need to drink something because they just ran a marathon. So the broth helps a little bit. Chewing something when you're nauseous just makes you feel more nauseous. So
Yeah.
the broth usually does help. And swelling stuff, the hands is like where you see that a lot. Their hands will just be all puffed up. with
Yeah,
sausages.
check their rings,
Yeah,
you know, if
check
they
their
are still
hands.
There's also some dependent, because as a runner, a lot of times you can also get swelling in your hands, just like I said, from dependency, but keep an eye out for this. If by chance they're not turning around and you feel like they're still not looking well, you will have doctors at your teams in the medical tent. It's very rare that we ever I've never in my career taken care of, running medicine did I have to actually administer any 3% normal saline. But the correct board question, test question is that would be the next step. I think I went backwards. Okay, these typically are able to leave the tent without significant concerns or anything like that, as long as they bounce back, don't need too many interventions. And then we do recommend that they have a follow-up with a regular provider within a couple of days, just to make sure that there's not something else that's going on. Remember that some of the medications that they might be taking, whether it's blood pressure medication, might also affect their electrolytes. There's multiple other conditions that maybe they thought were that they didn't realize that they had these problems until they came up with these problems at the marathon. So making sure that they have a good follow-up with the provider is really important. Okay, once again, I ruined it. But case scenario number 3, so you have a patient who collapses just past the finish line. 43-year-old, experienced male runner, had a finish time of 3:15, which is a PR for him, so he's pretty excited. He looks pale, he looks like he's gonna throw up on you, but he is alert and oriented. He's like, I'm fine, just let me sit here, Blood pressure's low, heart rate 100, temperature 99.5. So it's, he doesn't have any type of confusion. This often is exercise-associated collapse, and here's your algorithm again. Just like kind of Dr. Sedgley had mentioned, you go in and first start with assessing your mental status exam, seeing how that is, getting legs up as needed. Sometimes they can be a lot larger than you. If Dr. Sedgley were to collapse at the end of the finish line, and I had to take care of him, by God, I would. But sometimes
Just don't get cut underneath the,
it's just, you just need to slowly lay him down on the ground and get up those giant limbs that he has. Again, talking to them about their hydration, making sure that we're not just handing them water because we think that they're dehydrated, but taking into consideration, kind of all the other things. What have you been drinking lately? What were you drinking out on the course? Take a look at their shirt, all these different things. And this is just, again, this is just routine hydration. But for the most part, you want to get them up, get them moving, and get the blood flowing again. And then one of the things we talked about, before, but again, criteria for discharging from the tent, you know, who goes to the hospital and who gets to stay with their family. If their temperature is normal, if their thought process is normal, if they can walk on their own power, they're drinking, they're eating, they're communicating, well, then for the most part, we let them go and they can make sure that they got their medal in case they weren't able to pick it up just yet. Because obviously that's why everyone runs races, is for the medal and for the swag. Case number 4, medical tent with cramps, 38-year-old. He's done this before. Finish time 3:45. EMTs actually had to bring him in a wheelchair. He's like screaming. His forehead is like caked with salt. He's wearing like a t-shirt that just has like one of those salt lines on it. And you know, this would be an example of exercise-associated muscle cramps. Again, not necessarily to the point where it's exercise-associated hyponatremia, but he might just kind of be somewhere in between early stages before he actually got to hyponatremia. This is going to be the one that we need you guys more than ever, more than anything, is going to be right here. And for the most part, they do pretty well. I actually had a pretty interesting scenario myself, personal experience. I ran the Baltimore, which is the 5K, and then you run the half. So it's not like I was running a full marathon, but I was running a little bit more than the half marathons. And it was a hot day that day, hotter than I had anticipated. And boy, was I cramping at the end, And I looked like I'm convulsing. And this lady's like, ma'am, are you okay? And I'm like, literally like just pounding chips, looking like I'm like some type of weird funky dance. And she's like, ma'am, I'm like, I'm a sports doctor. I'm fine. And I was like, is this rhabdo? So, you know, I mean, rhabdo certainly is on your differential diagnosis, if cramping is severe. You know, yeah, is this rhabdo? Anyways, I obviously survived, and it really was just, you know, cramping. I was not fully prepared for that race. But anyways, nonetheless, great story.
So be aware, heat injury exists on a spectrum. And heat cramps are kind of that like, you know, porch towards heat exhaustion, which is like, you know, the foyer. And then when you have heat stroke, you know, that's like the basement where the chainsaw massacre occurs. So like you can have cramping and it might just be, you know, hydration issues, salt issues, but if it's hot, I've had this happen on a hot race too. They come up to me, I'm cramping everywhere. They're like, we can help you. And I'm like, touch me and I'll have you arrested. They're like, if they want help, help them, but just be thinking, a lot of times you get sucked into it, it's only nausea. And then it turns out it was the heart attack. It was only cramping, and it was your chance to stop the heat stroke. So, you know, nothing wrong with walking up and like, hey, how you doing, Claire? How you feeling? Cramping up?
Yeah.
You know? And it's interesting, people will often have had this problem before. No, cramping is more common over 35 with hypertension than other medical problems. So if they write it on their bib or it's on the RaceSafe app, you can always check it. But just be aware, like some of these like innocuous things can be a little tricky.
One of the other things that we have not talked about, but is in your protocols, I mean, the other thing when you're talking about cramping, you know, is this true cramping? Do they have any history of sickle cell trait, right? Can they, you know, do they have medical history that is really important? I think that also is something that unfortunately happens is, you know, you almost kind of normalize seeing people looking like they're about to fall over. And it can be really difficult to figure out, you know, which one's sick and which one just ran a marathon is not really that sick, just needs a couple minutes. But you know, you need to be on the lookout for all these things, but you also don't want to stop every single person. So this comes with experience. And so I'm really glad that you guys are helping us this year. Please, by all means, feel free to come back. If you're, you know, usually Baltimore people stick around Baltimore. And so like, you know, get in contact with us. But certainly, you know, always kind of like think about the worst, but, you know, keep your differential, and also don't get pigeonholed into, oh, this is just, exercise associated, cramps. Because you don't wanna miss that one that really could be. But that's also why we evaluate, reevaluate, and guess what? We have lots of friends. Differential by finish time, we're gonna kind of see a couple different packs come in. And I keep forgetting that I have two screens here. We have a couple different packs that come in. So, our faster runners, and Dr. Sedgley, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of times this is where we kind of keep our radar up a little bit higher for our heat stroke patients, right? Because they are really like moving, their metabolism is really going. And so sometimes that can be bad news bears. And then, you have your slower runners that we think a little bit more like along the exertional associated hyponatremia. And so somewhere in between also is when we have a big cluster of the most common running times. So you'll have like fluctuations through the day. One time you'll be bored, and then before you know it, like you like can't even, keep your race safe, charts up and everything like that. And then before you know it, there's just gonna be like, hey, where'd everybody go? And then you realize that your day is just about done. Except for we never try to close up early because those are sometimes the people that need us the most. If they're taking that long to make it to us after the course, God bless runners because they really give it everything that they got. And I gotta tell you, sometimes there is some mental health things that happen, with our runners that sometimes that's their way of coping. They push themselves to the limit, sometimes almost to a fault. And so runners are tough, they got the blisters, they put in the miles and they put in their time. And so the last thing that they want to do is give up. So sometimes they're a little bit resistant, but usually pretty reasonable. So
They canceled Twin Cities Marathon yesterday because they thought it was gonna be too hot. And they still had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people run that course.
Oh, yeah.
So if you're dealing with a runner and they've got purposeful movement forward, don't stop them. They can't make it forward, they're falling over and they're confused, that's different. We're not gonna go tackle people looking for business. They're moving forward, you're like, hey, how you doing? They're like, boo, go away, I hate you. Okay, have a great race.
they will declare themselves if
So-
needed.
5 minutes for
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm going to go over to like what they're gonna be doing if we get a chance.
Yeah, sure. I will be no more than 5 more minutes. Real quick, don't forget, anaphylaxis can happen out there. There's bees out there. Sometimes people can get stung. Check their bibs, see if they have any allergies. Unfortunately, this is a pretty scary condition that I'm sure you guys have all been taught how to treat. But, this actually doesn't really change very much compared to regular hospital medicine or, athletic training medicine. So we don't necessarily need to go into it too much. Be careful of the ones that are leaning forward and doing the tripod position because there are a lot of asthmatics out there. There are a lot of respiratory stuff out there. Who knows? I'm sure there's probably even a couple cases of COVID out there running. So be conscientious about this. Protect yourself. Be alert for these types of, for when you start seeing patients hyperventilating. Just remember that hyperventilation can also cause cramping. And sometimes that can cause problems and confusion as a clinician who's seeing somebody. But do we have albuterol in the, I know EMS carries albuterol if needed. If someone asks if someone has their inhaler with them, do you have a family member here who can bring it to you? Sometimes we'll call the family member, they'll run out to the car and grab it if they forgot. They forgot to run with it even though that they're severe asthmatic. So just be conscientious about respiratory things. And we already talked about cardiac care and hypoglycemia. We will have some finger sticks there. Be conscientious. Do they have an insulin pump? Did they have a long-acting insulin? And we can help to assist in any of this, but essentially just be conscientious that hypoglycemia can also cause some other concerns such as altered mental status and such. And we hate to have to talk about this, but certainly, be alert for, Boston Marathon. It's been how many years now? It was 10 this year, right? Yeah, so, if you ever do get a chance to go up to Boston, it certainly is, certainly worth going and seeing. And just a heartfelt moment. If you have not heard the story, there is a really good, interesting documentary about it. But bless all of those first responders' hearts. But there is a triage in here that you can certainly look up. But just be aware that such things
So
exist.
not be freaked out, there will be bomb dogs coming through the tents in
Yeah.
the morning, there will be snipers on top of the buildings throughout the day, so.
The city has a plan.
There's
The
a
city
plan,
has a
yes.
plan. Our plan is to protect ourselves until asked upon. Okay, so, and that will be clearly communicated, with your staff. You are not necessarily to be expected to just, go find whatever's going on. You come check in with you check in with, your head team first, and then instructions will be deployed that way if needed. But that will come from the command center, which is much larger than us. And we can communicate that, that information to you, but always be prepared, plan for the worst, but hope for the best.
You'll pretty much stay where you're at, stand by to stand by, find your leadership. They're gonna be waiting for what the police and fire EMS tell us. It's gonna come through Dr. Ryan, myself, Dr. Amley, Dr. Schwenke, and that may just be stay put. Take care of whoever you're taking care of, but don't go anywhere else. We don't want you to become more work for us, more victims. We have plans for all this, but you guys, if you can follow instructions, just stay put, stay calm. It may be as simple as everyone walk to Oriole Park at Camden Yards. That way. If you hear my voice, walk that way, but we will tell you what to do. It'll come through Carissa. It'll come through however your leadership is. So find that person who's always with you. You're never alone on the course.
Jay, you're up.
How much time you want?
5 minutes.
Jay, can you give Carissa 5 minutes?
Yeah.
You okay?
Okay.
You want us to stand up in front?
Sure, oh boy, back in my days. It's been a minute.
And be where the video is.
Oh, sure.
Yep, just right here.
Short
Yes, I
people,
got you.
all are
I
welcome.
can see you. I can see you.
Oh, I can see myself.
Give me 30 seconds here. So we're gonna have, thank you, Kelly, that was great. Hopefully that was a good way to kind of organize all the data we gave you. We're gonna stop the live stream on YouTube. What we're gonna do is we're gonna talk about what to expect on race day, probably less than 5 minutes, and then we're gonna have Jay talk to you about Race Safe. Any questions about the case studies, the additional stuff there? All right, Carissa, what is it?
Okay. Well, so just in one part, I know, your professors will give you a lot of this information, but make sure you bring lots of layers that day because temperatures do change from early in the morning to later in the afternoon and later after that. So make sure you have lots of layers of clothes, bring raincoats, depending on what the weather is gonna look like, because you will be outside of a tent at some point during the day. Some part of the day you might be in the tent, but you will be outside. Make sure you bring lots of snacks, whatever that thing is for you. It is a long day, so keep yourself energized. Like Dr. Sedgley said, there will be food, but if there's snacks, water bottles, all those things that you need, please make sure you bring what you want for the day to keep yourself going. You will be with one of us. I will be in the main medical tent, and then we'll spread out the rest of your staff, certified staff with us as well. You will be in one of 3 different locations. It'll be the finish line chute. You'll be at the finish line medical tent, and then you'll be over at the recovery / there's gonna be a little bit of an annex medical tent over there. So your role in the chute, what do you think your role in the chute is? Keep people moving. Where should you stand when you're trying to get people to keep moving?
To the side.
To the side, because what are they gonna do?
Throw up.
They're gonna throw up. It's gonna be throw up all day long in the chute. So be prepared. Don't wear nice shoes because you're probably gonna get splashed too. So